January 2, 1996 Observer Newsletter, WWE bringing in surprises for Royal Rumble. A look at an ever-changing wrestling business, predictions for 1996, tons more. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228 January 2, 1996. In an effort to combat falling buy rates, the WWF has sent out for many surprising names in the Royal Rumble. Among those known to have been contacted for the event are Dan Severn, Jake Roberts, Ultimate Warrior, Big Van Vader, and Rick Martel. Of those names, the only name that has been mentioned at all on television is Warrior, although Vince McMahon, in negotiating with people about being on the show, did mention Vader and Warrior as appearing in the Rumble. The situation with Warrior is surprising since he's been mentioned on the syndicated Superstar show twice about a potential return to the WWF, but has yet to be mentioned on cable. Several WWF wrestlers believe Warrior is in for not only the Rumble, but going to return as a regular, but one who is in position to know better than most wrestlers claimed that it wasn't the case, and nobody in what I'd call a position that I believe they'd know 100%, or even 75% for that matter, has told us anything one way or another. McMahon gave a hazy answer when asked on an internet chat, saying, in order for the Ultimate Warrior to return to the WWF, the moon and the stars, and the sun and the planet Pluto would all have to be perfectly aligned in some sort of celestial magnificence. But who knows? Anything can happen in the WWF. Even though the television related to the Rumble build-up was all taped this past week, no interviews were done at any of the tapings building up any of the aforementioned names. It appears most of the work by Vince McMahon and others to contact these surprising names began after the tapings were completed this past week, which means they went into the Rumble's television build-up with no distinct plans on where they were going with the show, which is decidedly un-Titan-like. Roberts, 40, would probably be, aside from Warrior, the biggest name of the group as far as the WWF audience is concerned, and may have some interest when it comes to curiosity, as he's been out of the national spotlight for more than 3 years. He retired from wrestling last year to go into religion and vowed he would never return. We don't know officially at press time if he's agreed to return or not. Warrior, 38, would mean something for one show, although it's doubtful the way buy rates are right now that anyone except Hulk Hogan, and maybe not even him anymore, really makes a noticeable difference. If he stays around long term, as is rumored, the negatives far outweigh the positives on numerous standpoints. Warrior turned down a $500,000 per year guaranteed deal with WCW. Unless he's come to the point in his own life where he sees that if he doesn't make a last run now, he'll never get another chance, that he isn't going to come back to wrestling unless huge money is thrown his way. The face of wrestling has changed greatly over the past few years, as has drug testing in the WWF, and literally in the current environment the Ultimate Warrior that got over couldn't even exist today, let alone be worth the kind of money he most likely is asking for. As far as that goes, the WWF that existed in the Ultimate Warrior's day also no longer exists, and when you are talking about a guy who has a history of walking out, the fact the company is a lot different and morale is a lot worse than the world he left many years ago. Of course, if he's going in with the mentality that he's older and this is his last chance to make big money to live off for the rest of his life, he may come in with an attitude where he'll put up with more than he has in the past provided the money is there. In addition, it would be surprising given his track record of basically, with maybe a few exceptions, not working at all the past few years, that he isn't going to go back on the road without a guaranteed deal, which if McMahon breaks existing policy, opens up a whole new can of worms, because you can't think Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart would sit well if they were earning less money in 1996 than Jim Hellweight, or even he has perks they don't have. And we haven't even discussed that there is more emphasis on having good matches now than there was when he was around. And he is, after all, the Ultimate Warrior, which means he'll have to be on top, and he hasn't worked for 3 years, and he was pretty much horrible when he was working, and standards have only gotten harsher since he left. The Vader name is the most intriguing. With the WWF short on heels, and he has a proven pay-per-view draw, the two potentially could fit like a glove. However, Vader is used to big money, has the avenue of getting big money in Japan, is coming off a serious injury, and hasn't wrestled a schedule as grueling as the Titan schedule in years. Severn was contacted by McMahon this past week and was asked to come in for the Rumble and that they would do nothing to make him look bad. There is a clause in UFC fighters' contract with SEG that covers competition, and that I believe they are prohibited from working a competitor's pay-per-view show for 2 years. I'm not sure if Severn's contract is different from others, because his lawyer may have negotiated various points out of it based on his doing pro wrestling events, where SEG would even be mad at him doing a WWF show or consider WWF as competition. My gut feeling is SEG wouldn't be happy, because there is the credibility problem of someone it is putting in a pay-per-view main event being sold largely based on the fact it is real, appearing on a widely publicized pay-per-view event that is clearly predominantly show ahead of sport. The statement that the pro wrestling business is ever changing has never been more true. Over the past year, the face of the industry has changed once again. Some trends were probably predictable. Less house shows and more pay-per-view shows. An increase in pay-per-view shows would lead to a decrease in buy rates, although maybe not to the level they actually did decline. Regional and independent wrestling in the United States for the most part getting weaker. Diesel failing as WWF champion was probably expected by most, and Bret Hart being put back on top would have probably been an inevitability to anyone who thought the situation out. Hulk Hogan losing some degree of popularity and drawing power was also expected, but fans turning on him at the level they did at many of the house shows had to surprise a lot of people. And who really was surprised that Ric Flair returned to full-time wrestling in 1995 after promising to retire? Maybe the biggest surprise of all is that Atsushi Onita stayed retired. But most of the major items of 1995 were things that probably wouldn't have been predicted going into the year. Going into 1995, who would have ever predicted that by the end of the year? 1. WCW would put a television show head-to-head with Monday Night Raw and not only duel the show evenly, but actually end the year with the momentum on its side. 2. 13 different promotions, including every major company but one, would work on the same bill for a show at the Tokyo Dome in Japan. 3. That UWF would for all real purposes buy out of business by the fall and that New Japan would work with them to create the biggest live gate in wrestling history. 4. That between 300,000 and 340,000 fans would attend 2 pro wrestling shows on consecutive nights in the same building. 5. That UFC would surpass both WWF and WCW on pay-per-view, and spawn its own set of competitors. 6. That AAA, the group with more young talent than any company in the world, would not only not make any serious inroads in the United States, but that the Mexican economy would make the entire year topsy-turvy. 7. That WrestleMania would be the most publicized pro wrestling show in the United States in years due to Lawrence Taylor, but it would appear to have made little difference when it came to the buy rate. So what does 1996 look like? Making predictions now is even harder. There are so many factors, such as the thought process of the hierarchy of Turner as the company changes with the Time Warner buyout, that have little to do with wrestling, that are really the most important things to the long term of US and even world pro wrestling. Going into 1996, the key factors in the United States appear to be the level of commitment Turner Broadcasting puts into World Championship Wrestling. WCW will be as strong as that level of commitment. The biggest story as we end 1995 and go into 1996 is the Monday Night Wars and the changes in wrestling that have come from those wars. The fact Nitro became the highest-rated weekly show on TNT and that the Saturday TBS numbers are going through its seasonal growth period leaves WCW filled with momentum. WWF is a lot shakier. How shaky is the question? The Fox network has expressed an interest in its own late-night weekly wrestling show for the 1996 fall season, which could conceivably change the face of wrestling once again depending upon who gets control of the show, if they decide to go with a show. Then there is the unanswered question of just how well ECW can do when or if it gets on pay-per-view. A company can limp along financially and stay afloat without pay-per-view, although Jerry Jarrett's Memphis company is the only real example of a company doing so in the US, but it can't be a player in today's game without it. And what about UFC? In many ways, the success of UFC parallels the 1988-89 period in Japan with the popularity of the second coming of the UWF. There are notable differences, of course. UFC is so controversial that politicians are attempting to get it banned. That never happened with UWF. UFC, while 2 of its biggest stars at present are pro wrestlers, is not like UWF, where all of its stars had already established names, and some of them fairly big names, within traditional pro wrestling. UFC is real. UWF was a more realistic and generally stiffer-looking version of worked pro wrestling, complete with the same predetermined finishes. But when it comes to examining the marketplace, there are more similarities. UWF, with no television, because it sold itself as being real, became the hottest pro wrestling promotion in the world for a short period of time because it had a new unique style. UFC, with no television, has surpassed both WWF and WCW of late when it comes to pay-per-view buy rates because it had a unique style that captured a lot of people's imaginations. Unlike UFC, UWF led to tremendous changes in both work style and booking of traditional Japanese pro wrestling that led to pro wrestling in the long run gaining in popularity, the elimination of non-finishes in the major companies, an increase in seriousness and legit-looking work, and introduction to pro wrestling fans of numerous moves that could be put over. American pro wrestling, with its emphasis on silliness and total lack of credibility with its audience, unlike Japanese pro wrestling which has a strong degree of its own version of credibility, will have a harder time strengthening itself by taking from what has made UFC popular. After a few years, UWF broke up and separated into different groups, each headed by a big UWF name. UFC has also spawned 2 different new groups, and there will be more by the end of this year. However, those groups have, instead of using UFC big names as its top draws, have built shows around the biggest drawing name in UFC but not an individual. That name is Gracie, which has become synonymous with this new genre. Some predictions by company for 1996. World Wrestling Federation. This company faces a lot of question marks. The WWF was the preeminent company in the world for several years. The signs declining buy rates, declining ratings, declining amount of house shows, certainly don't look positive. At this point it appears 1996 will be built around Shawn Michaels. If nothing else, Michaels is the best all-around performer that regularly works in the United States. He's got it all. Ability, interviews, charisma. The company has had a problem when it comes to the heel side for quite a while, and if anything, the problem has gotten worse. But a bigger problem than that is Vince McMahon has lost his Midas touch. In the 80s, he took some people who had minimal talent and even minimal charisma and marketed them in a manner to which they became major stars. Over the past 5 years, for every success McMahon has had creating a new character, he's had 5 failures. Before, the common theme was McMahon would take wrestlers that meant nothing elsewhere and turn them into legitimate stars. He did it in 1995 with Kevin Nash, but didn't with any others. Now the WWF has taken wrestlers who were strong, viable stars elsewhere, and gimmicked them to where they mean little when it comes to the box office when the national spotlight shines on them. Another potential cloud hanging over the company's head has to do with the government investigation related to Vince McMahon's 1994 steroid trial. While nothing coming out of that story will directly affect business, if there winds up being any link to Titan Sports, McMahon may end up being involved in some fashion in another hard fight on a totally different front. In many ways, it was almost remarkable how well he appeared to handle the 1993-94 ordeal, but at the age of 49 or 50, depending upon which birthday one chooses to believe, that fight took a lot out of the man. He's already got a major fight in wrestling, one that inevitably the odds are against him in because he's trying to use brains to combat money, and in wrestling, brains usually win out in the short run, but in the long run money is hard to beat. McMahon acknowledgement in a recent interview that he would consider moving Raw to another night to avoid the competition shows he recognizes this himself. He should know the realities of this better than anyone. It's the same story that knocked off his adversaries in the 1980s, although during that period he had the advantage in the brain side as well. This time on the money side, the shoe is on the other foot. World Championship Wrestling, who in August would have believed that by the end of the year, it would be the WWF acknowledging it may move its flagship Monday Night Raw that was coming off its most successful quarter in history. In the 15 weeks of head-to-head battles between September 11th and December 18, Raw averaged a 2.433 rating to Nitro's 2.387, although from a ratings standpoint, Nitro won 7 of the weeks, Raw won 6 and 2 were tied. However, judging from a ratings standpoint should give Raw a slight advantage because Raw has a more favorable time slot on the West Coast in that 9 p.m. has more television viewers than 6 p.m. on Mondays, when the first Nitro airs. By comparing the rating shares, you take the time slot disadvantage out of the equation. In this case, the 2 shows ended in a flat-out tie with 3.467 shares, however Nitro won 8 weeks, Raw 5 and 2 were dead even. By any standard, Nitro has won 3 weeks in a row. Going into September, one probably would have considered it a success for WCW to lose by a 2.5 to 2.0 margin every week. Advertising was sold based on Raw doing a 2.9 for the fall quarter, a figure it never reached all season, and Nitro doing a combined 2.0 for both the live and replay showing, when its lowest combined figure was a 2.8. However, in the process of knocking a full ratings point plus off Raw, WCW gave away several potential pay-per-view main events for free, and frustrated its viewers were one screw job finish of a main event after another. But even doing more things wrong than right, WCW has the money on its side, and it has the wrestling talent on its side, and it has the television exposure on its side. Although pay-per-view figures vary depending upon which organization one talks to based on independent figures, it appears the sides are fairly even, with WCW, if anything, having an advantage because the in-your-house shows are priced less, have less interest and thus draw a lot less money. WCW has a big advantage overall on cable, as its weekend shows kill WWF's and Monday is fairly even. WWF has a slight syndication advantage, but in overall viewership, WCW, because it has more shows and more stations, has one every week but one, the week following the Shawn Michaels angle, this fall season. WWF has a big advantage when it comes to the ability to run house shows, but since that part of the business is in general a money loser, in WWF's case, considered a loss leader while WCW rarely runs them, Whatever advantage WWF has of being the stronger house show promotion is offset by the fact they're losing money running them. WCW has stronger talent. Overall, WWF has stronger and more organized television and generally better booking. While some would argue that booking advantage may not be the case right now, it is inconceivable that WWF would ever handle or carry out a scenario as poorly as WCW did building up to the World Cup in Starrcade. But the most important thing is that WWF has to at some point make money. It doesn't appear that is the case with WCW. In a war of attrition, which this wrestling war appears to be, WCW has a very huge tactical advantage. New Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan was the most successful company in the world in 1995, and it doesn't appear that 1996 should be any different. They've shown the ability to phase down the older stars and create new stars in their place, something most other groups have severely lacked. They don't need gimmicks. Their feuds have more realism than any other promotion and thus draw more money. They seem to have long-term planning when it comes to getting new faces over. And while some aspects of the UWF feud were reminiscent of American booking, destroying the opposition from the get-go to prove you were better all along, it was still set up, carried out and paid off in coin far better than any promotion versus promotion angle has in years. While it will be very difficult to duplicate the level of success this group has had the past 2 years, it goes into 1996 with the most positive outlook of any major wrestling organization. All Japan Pro Wrestling. The basic facts of All Japan have been stated many times. No company can match its talent at the top. But it's the same names for year upon year. Interest declined in 1995, and there is nothing on the horizon that makes it look like this trend is going to change. Certainly the return of Steve Williams will help. But how long can a company whose drawing power is based so strongly on nothing but work rate? They do almost no angles, grudge matches don't exist, and gimmicks are virtually non-existent as well, exist with the same faces in the same spots year after year. Crowds at the tag team tournament speak for themselves. Even the classic matchup of Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi versus Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao has now been done so often that it is no longer special and no longer guarantees a sellout crowd outside of Tokyo. And don't forget an important factor. These guys on top are only human. They've been killing themselves year after year, and it's impossible that all aren't hurting physically. And they're all getting 1 year older. Prediction for 1996. Plenty of match of the year candidates among the big boys. But a continual decline in attendance. But they'll probably still sell out every show all year long in Tokyo. AAA, probably the ultimate pro wrestling organization of the year 1996, would be to combine the booking and television production of Paul Heyman, the front office of New Japan, the money and backing of WCW, and the talent of AAA. No group can match this company for talent, particularly depth. The scary part about it is the ages of the guys on their way up. Aside from Pero Aguayo and Cien Caras, who will remain on top because they have the name value, the bulk of the upcoming talent is in their 20s and most improved greatly over the past year. Overall depth is slightly weakened since Fuerza Guerrera, El Hijo del Santo and Blue Panther left over the past year, but it's only a slight talent loss because of the continual improvement of those who stayed. Literally for Psicosis, 24, and Juventud Guerrera, 21, the sky is the limit for their future, and both could challenge Shawn Michaels by the end of the year as the best performer that works the United States. Rey Mysterio Jr., 21, is more questionable because his ankles are so bad and he's got to tone down his style, but once he gets in the ring, he forgets his injuries and his flying is without peer. And for every Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera, there are guys who literally come out of the woodwork like Venom, 18, El Mosco, 18, and Pero Aguayo Jr., 17. That may surpass them given 3 or 4 years of regular work. Who knows? At the rate Aguayo is developing, he may be in that league by the end of 1996. The downside. Mexico, chaotic by nature, is even more so due to the economic problems. When a company is controlled by Televisa, the largest media conglomerate in the country, that gives it tremendous advantages during periods of a strong economy. It also, when the economy has gone into a freefall, as it did in 1995, places major strains on the company. In many ways, it's a tremendous credit to the wrestlers and Antonio Pena that the company drew as well as it did given the economy this past year. But the signs are that things aren't going to get better economically, even though some of the younger wrestlers will probably bring the style of pro wrestling to levels unseen anywhere else in the world over the next year. EMLL. This group can survive a bad economy better than AAA because it owns most of its arenas, and its owners are very well heeled financially. I don't expect 1996 to be a big year at the gate or in the ring, as with the exception of Hector Garza, it hasn't done a good job of developing new stars, but this group will survive with minimal obstacles. Its stability could overcome the talent and booking disadvantage and end 1996 as the #1 promotion in Mexico. All Japan Women. Nobody puts on better major shows anywhere in the world. This group finished 1995 strong, largely on the back of Manami Toyota. The strengths are they are almost guaranteed to have some of the best matches and best shows in the world in 1996. The weakness? Like All Japan, they don't seem to have new stars who can fill the shoes of the girls who undoubtedly will have to be phased out this year because their bodies won't be able to take the pounding any longer. Saki Hasegawa will be done in March. Toshio Yamada seems pretty banged up. Toyota is almost a medical miracle that she's done as much with as little time off. Akira Hokuto and Bull Nakano are both working in tremendous physically pain, even though they are both capable of still doing excellent matches provided they work infrequently. This upcoming year shouldn't be a problem when it comes to major shows, with Toyota going through a stream of great challenges, but by 1997, several of the underneath girls better be ready to step in. UFC, there are so many questions here, as brought over particularly last week, that who can say what the future holds? One thing is for certain. It is a major force on both the American and worldwide scene. There was more worldwide wrestling media at the last UFC than at WrestleMania. Its appeal crosses over greatly to pro wrestling. Roughly 40% of its pay-per-view buys, according to its most recent survey, are pro wrestling fans or disgruntled pro wrestling fans. Other similar groups will be around. And eventually someone in at least one of the shows with one of the groups is bound to get hurt, which will open up a new can of worms. ECW. There has never been a small promotion in the recent history of wrestling that has garnered as much attention as ECW. Although the group has yet to sell 1,500 tickets to a show in its history, its influence on the business is unbelievable. Aside from its fans showing up on WWF pay-per-view shows and almost taking over the show, its style and its performers are being copied throughout the world. Khanon's Baja California promotion is basically a copy of numerous styles, but largely based on ECW style and angles. Both WWF and WCW have taken both from its style and its angles. It has the most creative and innovative wrestling television show in the world, bar none. Its house shows probably set the standard for the United States in 1995 and may, with less talent, come close to hold its own with many of the larger worldwide groups. It is the only promotion in the world in 1995 that was able to create so many characters that at least got over to a great degree to its core audience. In some ways I see parallels between ECW and UFC when it comes to the audience. The core audiences of both groups love them. However, for each group to grow, they may need to go away from the style the audience loves so much into something that would be more marketable. ECW can control that, while UFC, in some ways being a shoot, is not something as easily controllable. While the enthusiasm of the ECW audience is A+ for television, it becomes a minus when you hear some of the chants like "show your tits" in regard to it going to a new level of popularity. Paul Heyman has to continually cater enough to the audience that they stay enthusiastic, but by going to the extreme, so to speak, he limits its future and limits the type of audience it can attract. It's impossible to try and play every side of the fence, as WWF seems to be trying these days, and be successful. But Heyman, who can control his audience better than most in the US, can negate the company's strengths in terms of money-making potential by trying to cater to a relatively small hardcore audience. The core UFC audience seems to really like the technical matches, and as a fan, I enjoyed the way the show turned out. At the last live show, the live crowd appeared to enjoy that show, with the exception of those who came only to see Tank Abbott destroy some people, more than any of the other live UFC shows I've either been to or talked with people who have attended. Nevertheless, while presenting a technical sport is great ammo against politicians, there is a question as to whether it's what is going to consistently attract the type of people who swell the buy rates to 1.0. Just as with ECW, while getting on the house mic and saying "mother F" or this and that definitely gets a pop out of those who attend the shows live, I wonder how well it plays on television. I guess in a sense we already know, because it's on no major broadcast channels despite being the most innovative and talked about pro wrestling show in the world. Pancrase, this is the other extreme. Pro wrestling as sport, well, almost sport, because I don't think any pro football games or pro basketball games have worked finishes, and at least some pancrase matches do. But some don't, which makes it unique in the world among companies that fall under the strict pro wrestling umbrella. The closest thing to total sport than any of us have seen of pro wrestling in our lifetimes. It's reasonably successful in Japan. Not through the roof. It can't sell out the Tokyo Dome. Its regular monthly shows of late seem to draw in the 4,500 range, except for maybe 2 majors a year. It starts on pay-per-view in March. I'd say the odds of it making it as a pay-per-view major success aren't good, but can it be profitable? By profitable, as a taped show, That probably means an 0.2 buy rate on a consistent basis. That depends upon just how many total hardcore UFC fans there are who are into the wrestling and the submissions. Based on what I saw in Denver, I think there may be enough by now. USWA, somehow, it always survives. This group had a great summer and a horrible fall. But whenever you count it out, it comes back. It may have been the only wrestling company or any significant size in the United States to turn a legitimate profit this past year. I'm very confident this group will be around next year. Not a lot stronger than it is now, but stronger. The people running it know their territory. Missy Hyatt's lawsuit against Turner Broadcasting, World Championship Wrestling and Eric Bischoff was legally concluded, which is a nice term for settled out of court, over this past week. By virtue of the agreement, terms were undisclosed and discovery material in the depositions will remain confidential. Hyatt said she was happy the 22-month ordeal was over and that even though material in the depositions must remain confidential, the legal conclusion won't stop her from writing her planned tell-all book on her experiences in wrestling and in the Turner organization. There is no truth to rumors that Hyatt, who is now working as a vice president for Paradise Films, has been contacted by the WWF to be a proposed sister love character. Hyatt, 32, filed suit against TBS, WCW and Bischoff claiming unequal pay, sexual harassment and wrongful termination in her dismissal by WCW in early 1994. Taking sleaze to a new level, Gene Okerlund on the WCW hotline on December 24 talked about honoring Rick Steamboat at a retirement ceremony on the January 1st Nitro show, which will be live from the Omni in Atlanta. The story, which was totally fabricated by Okerlund, was apparently spurred by a tease he taped earlier in the week for television that day saying that a former WCW World Champion had announced his retirement, and to call the hotline for more details. As if that was a late-breaking story. When calling the hotline, the wrestler Okerlund talked about was Steamboat, whose final match was in August of 1994. There had been no plans whatsoever by WCW for a retirement ceremony for Steamboat on the Nitro show, nor had Steamboat ever been contacted by the company. At one point there had been talk of inviting and honoring Steamboat at the 1995 Slamboree pay-per-view, but because of the legal problems between the two sides, the idea was nixed months before the show and Steamboat was never contacted about it. Since retiring, Steamboat has filed a suit against Vince McMahon and Titan Sports for trademark infringement, and has either filed or threatened a suit against WCW for failing to honor the final 2 months of his contract in 1994 as the company fired him when his career was terminated by a back injury suffered in a clash match against Steve Austin. The only contact WCW has made with Steamboat, ironically enough, was 3 weeks ago when Turner lawyers threatened Steamboat with a countersuit if he failed to drop his claim against the company. Apparently, when the word got out within the company of Okerlund's antics, his explanation was that he claims he said on the hotline that there was a rumor about a retirement ceremony on January 1st. WCW announced its Clash of Champions lineup for January 23 in Las Vegas as part of a 2-day swing at Caesars Palace. The Clash itself will feature 6 matches, 5 of which have been determined: Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage vs. Ric Flair and the Giant, Sting vs. Brian Pillman, Lex Luger vs. Eddie Guerrero, Kevin Sullivan vs. Disco Inferno, and Alex Wright vs. Dean Malenko. In addition, they will be doing a mock wedding of Colonel Rob Parker and Sensuous Sherry on the air. Hey, weddings are usually good for ratings points, although I don't think this one will, but at least it should be good for some laughs, and it better be because it won't be good for anything else. There will probably be one more match added. Originally Public Enemy was to face Nasty Boys, and it still may happen. There is a hold-up on the debut of Public Enemy because they are still determining what name they are going to use and what measures are necessary to legally use the name. Def Jam Records owns the name Public Enemy because of the rap group. Paul Heyman claims he owns the rights to use the name in pro wrestling from a deal with Def Jam. Heyman made a deal with the two wrestlers where he'd be able to continue to sell merchandise on hand, such as videotapes of shows they've been on, and he gave them rights to the name Flyboy Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge. Rocco Rock, Ted Petty, wants to use the Public Enemy name in WCW, and supposedly WCW is talking with Def Jam about it. So until the mess is straightened out, it could delay their debut and cause them to miss the Clash. They are also advertising for Nitro the night before in Las Vegas at the same location with Hulk Hogan vs. One Man Gang, Randy Savage vs. Ric Flair for the WCW title, and Sting and Lex Luger vs. Bobby Eaton and Steve Regal. There will be a slight decrease in the scheduled number of pay-per-view events for 1996, although as the year goes on, it will probably change many times over. Originally, the plan for 1996 was for WWF to run 12 events and WCW to run 11. WWF may have cut down to 11. We have disputed schedules, one listing an April 28 date in Omaha and another not listing a pay-per-view on that date, and WCW has definitely cut to 9 events, although with 2 clash shows that still makes a total of 11 major events, as of current plans. As things stand right now, the 1996 schedule is: January 21st, WWF Royal Rumble in Fresno, California; February 11th, WCW Super Brawl in St. Petersburg; February 18th, WWF in Your House in Louisville; March 24th, WCW Uncensored; March 31st, WWF WrestleMania in Anaheim; April 28th, WWF in Your House, rumored to be in Omaha; May 19th, WCW Slamboree; May 26th, WWF in Your House; June 16th, WCW Great American Bash; June 23rd, WWF King of the Ring; July 7th, WCW Bash at the Beach, Lake Tahoe, California; July 21st, WWF in Your House; August 18th, WWF SummerSlam at the Gund Arena in Cleveland; September 15th, WCW Fall Brawl; September 22nd, WWF in Your House; October 20th, WWF in Your House; October 27th, WCW Halloween Havoc; November 17th, WWF Survivor Series; November 24th, WCW World War III; December 15th, WWF in Your House; December 29th, WCW Starrcade. In addition, WCW will run 2 Clash of Champions specials in 1996, the January show from Las Vegas and an August 15th special. UFC plans are for shows on February 16th in San Juan, and back in May, July, September and December in cities yet to be determined. Both WCC and EFC are planning on return dates in March, in each case also on both dates and in cities that haven't been announced, and due to the political situation within this genre, my feeling is they may try and keep the location quiet and rely on local late giveaways for tickets. The Pancrase pay-per-view debut is also scheduled for March. WCC has talked of running 2 PPVs in 1996 and SEG has said they'll do 4 Pancrase shows. EFC hasn't said anything about a number of shows it plans for 1996. Results: December 18, Augusta, Georgia, WCW Monday Nitro tapings, 8,100 in attendance with 3,000 paid, Lex Luger b. Scotty Riggs, Sting b. Bubba Rogers, Dean Malenko b. Mr. JL, Ric Flair b. Eddie Guerrero, Luger b. Marcus Bagwell, Sting b. Bobby Eaton, WCW title The Giant b. Randy Savage DQ, Zodiac b. Disco Inferno, WCW TV title, Johnny b. Bad b. Dallas Page, Blue Bloods b. Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck, WCW title, Savage b. Flair DQ. December 19, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, WWF Superstars taping, 1,500 people in attendance, non-squash results, Savio Vega b. John Hawk 2 stars, Sons of Samoa, Samoan Tahitian Warrior, b. Arachnoids, Fighters aka Headbangers, WWF Tag Title, Smoking Guns b. Rad Radford, and Skip 2 stars, Davey Boy Smith b. Marty Jannetty 1 1/2 star, Ahmed Johnson b. Arachnoid 2 1 star, Skip b. Radford 2 1/2 stars, Owen Hart b. Henry Godwin 1 1/2 star, Duke Dries b. Arachnoid at 3 stars, Goldust b. Barry Horowitz, Sid and 1 2 -3 Kid b. Aldo Montoya and Avatar 1 star, Diesel b. Isaac Yankem 1 star, Bret Hart and Undertaker and Razor Ramon b. Yokozuna and Owen Hart and Sid Dud. December 19, Osaka Furitsu Gym, rings, 5,382 attendance, Kuristefu b. Wataru Sakata, Ram Zaza b. Tsuyoshi Kurosaka, Peter Ura b. Kuramenchev, Mitsuya Nagai b. Nikolai Zuev, Yoshihisa Yamamoto b. Fulkan, Akira Maeda b. Hans Nyman. December 19, Hiroshi Naka, FMW, Combat Toyota b. Aki Kanbayashi, Megumi Kudo b. Kaori Nakayama, Riki Fuji and Hisakatsu Oya b. Gecko and Nanjo, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Miwasato b. Yukari Ishikura and Kudo, Jason the Terrible and Super Leather b. Gasaku Goshigawara and Katsutoshi Niyama, Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Match, Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga b. Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Koji Nakagawa and Horace Boulder and Masato Tanaka. December 20, Choshi FMW, Gecko b. Gasaku Goshigawara, Combat Toyota b. Yukari Ishikura, Katsutoshi Niyama b. Nanjo, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Miwasato b. Megumi Kudo and Kaori Nakayama, Jason the Terrible and Super Leather b. Riki Fuji and Hisakatsu Oya, Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Wing Kanemura b. Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Koji Nakagawa and Horace Boulder and Masato Tanaka. December 21, Yokohama Bunka Gym, FMW, 5,000 sellout, Gecko b. Gasaku Goshigawara, Kaori Nakayama b. Miwasato, Bad Nurse Nakamura b. Yukari Ishikura, Katsutoshi Niyama b. Tetsuhiro Kuroda, World Brass Knucks Tag Title, Horace Boulder and Hisakatsu Oya b. Daisuke Ikeda and Yoshiaki Fujiwara to win title, Street Fight Mr. Pogo b. Masato Tanaka, Megumi Kudo and Asia Kong b. Bison Kimura and Combat Toyota, Caribbean Barbed Wire Spider Net Double Hell Glass Death Match, Hideki Hasaka and Jason the Terrible and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga b. Haido and Wing Kanemura and Super Leather, Great Sasuke and Koji Nakagawa and Hayabusa be Riki Fuji and Super Delphin and Taka Michinoku. December 21 Beppu, JWP, One Night Tag Team Tournament, Kyuri Suzuki and Hikari Fukuoka be Fuseo Naochi and Saburo, Commando Borishoy and Devil Masami be Dynamite Kansai and Hiromi Yagi, Suzuki and Fukuoka be Masami and Borishoy to win tournament. December 21 Luisa PR WWC, Sean Summers D. Ray Gonzalez, San Gratiano B. Rex King Louisiana Leon El Exotico B. Gorgeous George, Rob Kellum, and Tahitian Warrior, Universal title, Carlos B. El Bronco DQ, WWC TV title, Kodiak, Texas Hangman Killer, Capul Garcido, Hurricane Castillo Jr. NC Ricky Santana. December 22 Tokyo Korakuen Hall FMW, 2150 sellout, Chigusa Nagiobi Bad Nurse Nakamura, Combat Toyota B. Kaoru, No Rope Barbed Wire Death Match, Megumi Kudo B. Shark Tsuchiya. December 22 Dallas Sportatorium, Confederate Wrestling Association, 1000 Papered, Lady KB Mad Madeline, Bo Vegas and Devin Michaels be Johnny Mantell and Bill Irwin, Tim Brooks be John Hawk DQ, Rod Price D. Action Jackson Lumberjack Match, Vito Mussolini be Sam Houston Core, Scott Putski be Greg Valentine, Chip the Firebreaker be Al Jackson. December 22 Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL La Infernal and La Diabolica be Xochitl Hamada and Guerrero Perpula, Guerrero Maya and Guerrero del Futuro de Alacranda Durango and Olympus, Chicago Express and Astro Jr. and Archangel B. Yoshihiro Tajiri and Justiciero and Olympico, Silver King and Dandy and La Fiera B. Negro Casas, and Felino, and Black Panther DQ, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Cajos and Emilio Charles Jr. B. Shocker, and Dos Caras and Lizmark. December 22 Compton, California Indiana Ultra Rojo and Falconcito de Oro be Machina Infernal and Cara Mercado, Wolverine and Meteoro be Bulldog Rivera and Impacto Cosmos be Almurieta, Piloto Suicida and Mercurio and Falcon de Oro be Dr. Muerte and Acero Dorado Jr., Psicosis and Damian B. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Durango Kid. December 22 Ponce PR WWC La Lady Gorgeous George, Hurricane Castillo Jr. Cur El Bronco, Sweet Brown Sugar, Skip Young, and Ray Gonzalez be Rex King and Sean Summers, Ricky Santana be Pulgarcito, WWC TV title, Kodiak Cur Duke Dries, non-title, Mabel B. Carlos Colon. December 22 Rossville, Georgia, TWA Jimmy Sharp be Warlock, Rick Justice be Roger Sartain, Joel Travis and Mr. Payne be Mike Collins and Chuck Colt Nightmare, Ted Allen be Keith Hart, Sartain 1 Blindfold Battle Royal. December 23 Tokyo Korakuen Hall Gia, 2050 sellout, Kato be Sato, Nagashima be Nakano, Tomoko Kuzumi and Tomoko Miguchi be Numao and Bomber Hikari, Uematsu and Satomura and Kaoru be Yukari Ishikura and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo, Chigusa Nagio be Combat Toyota. December 23 Tokyo Korakuen Hall Tokyo Pro Wrestling Toshinori Fujitabe Masuda, Yoshiro Ito be Makoto Gundam I Apollo Sugawara be Musashi, Kim Duke and Lee Yankyo be Hiroshi Hatanaka and Shun Matsuzaki, Masashi Aoyagi be Ryo Maik, Mr. Pogo be Kishin Kawabata, Benkei and Great Kabuki be Takashi Ishikawa and Bruiser Okamura. December 23 Cogwast PR, WWC, Tahitian Warrior DL Profe Louisiana Lady Rico Suave, Hurricane Castillo Jr. and Sweet Brown Sugar be Rex King and Sean Summers, Ricky Santana be Ray Gonzalez DQ, Cage Match, Sangre Tiana be Gorgeous George, Duke Dries be El Bronco DQ, WWC TV title, Kodiak Kerpul Garcido, Universal title, Carlos Colon NC Mabel, title held up after match. December 23 Chattanooga, ABWF Larry Santana Promoter, 125, Bobby Hayes be Billy Montana, Glamour Boy be Mike Mercedes, CM Quick and Hayes be Montana and Rawhead Rex, Larry Santo be David Young, Black Terminator Cur Lord Humongous. December 23 Memphis, WO and Rick Stryker be Project Player, Jeff Butler, Edric Hines be Filthy Little Freddy, Man Mountain Mike be Ripley Grimm, Fred James be Street Hawk, George Robertson, Derek King, Derek Taylor, be Fabulous Rocker, Chris Robertson, David Denton be Spanish Fly DQ. December 24 Tokyo Korakuen Hall New Japan, 1,740 in attendance, Black Cat be Yutaka Yoshi, El Samurai be Tatsuhito Takawa, Osamu Kido be Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Mishiyoshi Ohara be Yuji Nagata, Junji Hirata be Tada Yasuda, Hikura Nagami be Kunyaki Kobayashi DQ, Shiro Koshinaka be Osamu Nishimura, Shinya Hashimoto and Takashi Iizuka and Nagami be Kengo Kimura and Akatoshi Saito and Kobayashi. December 24 Tokyo Korakuen Hall, JWP, 2000 sellout, Fuseo Naochi be Miyazaki, Saburo be Tomoko Miyaguchi Tomoko Kuzumi and Commando Borishoy be Riko Amano and Mototani, Dynamite Kansai Mayumi Ozaki and Cutie Suzuki be Devil Masami and Hikari Fukuoka and Hiromi Yagi 2710. December 24 Osaka, Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling, 250 sellout, Tashimi Yokota, Jaguar Yokota, B. Nana Fujimura, Flor Metallica B. Lady Connors, Esther Moreno B. Yuki Lee, Jaguar Yokota B. Lola Gonzalez, Bull Nakano and Kuga the Bloody Phoenix B. Bison Kimura and Chikako Shiratori. December 25 Tokyo Korakuen Hall All Japan Women, 2100 sellout Mariko Yoshida and Saki Hasegawa and Kaoru Ito B. Atsuko Mita and Tomoko Watanabe and Yoshiko Tamura, Mima Shimoda B. Tashio Yamada, Asia Kong and Yumiko Hata B. Takako Inoue and Kyoko Inoue, Manami Toyota 31-minute matches Toyota ended with 9,3 and 18 record. December 25 Osaka, Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling, 250 sellout Nobu Endo B. Nana Fujimura, Esther Moreno B. Lady Connors, Yuki Lee B. Chikako Shiratori, Lola Gonzalez and Bull Nakano B. Flor Metallica and Jaguar Yokota, Bison Kimura B. Kuga the Bloody Phoenix. Japanese Television Rundown. November 27 All Japan, 1. Stan Hansen and Gary Albright beat Dan Crawford and Doug Furness when Hansen pinned Furness after a lariat. These teams didn't work well together. Hansen has fallen victim to age in a young man's style and Albright is very green at this style. 1 1/4 stars, 2. Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi beat Rob Van Dam and Johnny Smith when Misawa pinned Van Dam after a Tiger Driver while Kobashi power-bombed Smith. 2.5 stars, 3. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao went to a 30-minute draw with the Patriot and Johnny Ace. The last 12 minutes aired on television. In particular, the last 5 minutes were excellent with all kinds of near falls and great heat. The highlight was Patriot and Ace doing a backdrop/ace crusher combination move. The crowd gave both teams a big ovation after the match. 3 3/4 stars. December 2 New Japan, 1. Flair beat Osamu Nishimura in 10-17 with the figure 4. They chopped the hell out of each other and Flair did his usual routine. It was kind of just there rather than being good or bad. 2 1/4 stars, 2. Junji Hirata pinned Booker T in 6:29 with a diving headbutt off the top rope. T tried and some of his moves looked good, but his lack of experience showed here. 1 1/4 stars, 3. Masa Chono and Hiro Saito beat Bobby Eaton and Johnny B. Bad in 14:29 when Chono used the STF on Eaton. Eaton worked a lot for comedy and they did the bit where their teamwork wasn't working well. Bad did a nice somersault plancha, but looked pretty green in a new environment. Eaton didn't look green, but didn't look good either. 2 stars, 4. Riki Choshu and Masa Saito beat Nasty Boys in 8:32 when Saito pinned Knobs with the Saito suplex. At the age of 53, the Saito suplex doesn't look nearly as impressive as it did a decade ago when it was one of the hot moves in the sport. Nasty Boys took great fast bumps from Choshu's lariat. Otherwise, it wasn't much of a match. 2 stars, 5. Keiji Muto pinned Steve Regal in 16:03 with a moonsault. This was basically like watching Regal try and work a match with a tackling dummy. Until the last 2 minutes, Muto wouldn't do a thing. Regal was a good enough worker doing lots of unique maneuvers that it still was a decent match, even though Muto reverted back to his early year form. 2 stars. December 3 All Japan, 1. Jun Akiyama and Takao Mori beat Crawford and Furness when Akiyama pinned Crawford with a fisherman suplex. Only the last 3 minutes aired on television and it was excellent with one near fall after another with great heat. Crawford, who puts together the finishes in most of the Can-Am's matches, is one of the best in the world at putting together and executing a hot finish, too. Kawada and Tao beat Giant Baba and Tamon Honda when Tao pinned Honda after a powerbomb. Even though Baba is past gone and Honda is green, Kawada and Tao are a great team and turned this into an exciting match. The crowd really got into Honda getting near falls on Tao and the finish was excellent. 3 1/2 stars, 3. Misawa and Kobashi beat Hansen and Albright when Kobashi pinned Albright after a sleeper. It wasn't good at all until the crowd started getting into it after Albright hit a killer German suplex on Kobashi. Seeing Albright in these matches really shows just how great a worker Kawada really is to have that kind of a killer match with him. 1 1/4 stars. December 9 New Japan, 1. Sabu pinned Gran Hamada to win the UWA Junior Heavyweight title in 11:49 with the Arabian Moonsault. This was the match where Hamada broke his leg. The only spot it appeared he could have gotten hurt was doing a plancha over the post and he immediately grabbed his ankle. But he worked several minutes and appeared to be fine after that. No heat, but it was a good match. It was pretty clear the finish wasn't impromptu so the idea to change the belt didn't come because Hamada was injured. 3 1/4 stars, 2. Choshu and Nishimura beat Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 7:36 when Nishimura pinned Saito with a Northern Lights suplex. The finish came out of nowhere. but otherwise it was good. 2.5 stars. 3. Kazuo Yamazaki made Akitoshi Saito submit to a heel hold in 8:20. Yamazaki dominated it and looked very good. 2.75 stars. 4. Muto beat Tatsutoshi Goto in 10:03 with a leg whip, a moonsault and the figure 4. Muto started slow but looked really good carrying Goto. 3 stars. 5. Shiro Koshinaka pinned Chono with a power bomb in 13:40. The last few minutes were very good. Chono doesn't have any hot moves but has good psychology, and Koshinaka is one of the most underrated wrestlers of all time. 3.5 stars. December 10 All Japan, 1. Misawa and Kobashi beat Tao and Kawada to win the Real World's Strongest Tag League tournament in 24:04. This was their typical fantastic match, with the only thing that kept it from being the caliber of their match of the year types earlier in the year was the crowd wasn't into it at the usual level for some reason. These teams have probably faced each other too often, and even when they do an excellent match, everything comes off as something that's already been done before, particularly since they've used the storyline of Misawa being knocked out before. Kawada had Misawa on his shoulders on the floor and Tao came off the apron with a Nadawa choke slam. Misawa sold it for close to 10 minutes while Kobashi held on against both. Misawa made the comeback, building to the Tiger Driver on Kawada for a near fall. They kept trading near falls and submissions. Each did their big moves but couldn't get the pin. Finally, Misawa used a Tiger Driver on Kawada on the floor after picking up the mats, which left Tao on his own. After a few minutes, Misawa gave him a Tiger Suplex for a near fall, and Kobashi finished him off with the moonsault. 4.75 stars. December 10 All Japan Women, 1. Tomoko Watanabe retained the Japanese title, pinning Chaperita Asari in 7:29. Both worked hard. It wasn't perfect in spots, but Asari threw in some hot flying moves, including her Sky Twister for a near fall. She went for a combination forward Sky Twister and Hector Garza spin off the top but missed. After several near falls, Watanabe scored the pin after nearly taking Asari's head off with a lariat. Asari was a little black and blue around the nose area from her match on Raw with Asia Kong. 3 stars. 2. Yumiko Hata retained the All-Pacific title, pinning Toshio Yamada in 10:59 with a pyramid driver. It was still as hell with kicks, but both were bothered by bad knees, which made their flying moves not look good. In addition, there were a lot of missed spots and Yamada's kicks were going everywhere. They worked hard enough and had a good enough finish to overcome the missed spots. 3.25 stars. 3. Kyoko Inoue pinned Asia Kong in 1955 with the Niagara Driver. Inoue has really packed on the weight. Her spandex costume must have been screaming for mercy. However, this was an awesome match, particularly the second half. Kong even did a dropkick off the top rope and a tope before the two went back and forth with near falls, many of which were excellent. 4.5 stars. 4. Manami Toyota pinned Dynamite Kansai to win the WWA title in 22:39. Toyota's left knee was hurting big time, but there's no such thing as her being in a bad match. She didn't do as much high-flying as usual. Mainly Kansai kicked the hell out of her. Both kicked out of the other's finishers with a lot of great near falls. This was even better than the previous match. Kong went for the die hard, basically a razor's edge off the top rope, but Toyota attempted to reverse it into a Frankensteiner on the way down, but didn't quite get it right and wound up with a cradle for the pin. When it comes to consistency, psychology, durability, work rate and athletic ability to put out great matches nearly every time out, Toyota is the best worker I've ever seen. 4.5 stars. December 17 All Japan, 1. Albright pinned Honda after 2 German suplexes. These two were both amateur heavyweight stars, with Honda going to the Olympics 3 times and medaling once, and Albright being on the U.S. national team for World, not Olympic, meets along with being a collegiate star. They worked this UWF style and it was the best I've ever seen Honda look. On paper this match should have stunk, but instead both looked really good. 3.5 stars. 2. Baba and Hansen and Dory Funk beat Amori and Akiyama and Ryukaku Izumida when Hansen pinned Izumida with a lariat. Funk is kind of amazing for his age. 1.5 star. EMLL. The breakup off MLL run by Paco Alonso and CMLL run by Juan Herrera at least appears on the surface to be legit, as on a show in the Mexico City area on Christmas, they had booked Mascara Sagrada, AAA Atlantis, CMLL, and Blue Panther, Promel, to appear as headliners. The newspapers have termed this that the wrestlers have put pressure on the promotions to let them get as many bookings as possible because due to the economy, overall work and money is bad for all but the very top guys, and even for them it's nothing compared to what it was 1 year ago. With Arena Mexico closed down until February, the major house show of the week has been moved to Arena Coliseo every Friday. On December 22, they drew less than 1,000 fans as Shocker and Dos Caras and Lizmark lost to Cajos and Emilio Charles Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr. when Cajos got revenge for losing his mask by making Shocker submit in the deciding fall. The semi saw Silver King and La Fiera and Dandy beat Felino and Negro Casas, and Black Panther via DQ when Casas fouled Vegas. AAA. The television in Mexico from this past weekend, which means Galavision starting this coming weekend, featured nothing but year-in-review shows. As of the first weekend, the year-end highlights were caught up through mid-June, so it appears they'll finish it in 2 weeks. December tapings in Tijuana, December 6, Mexico City, December 15, and Leon, December 18, are all in the can, so they'll air in January. Rey Mysterio Jr., Damian and Psicosis worked December 22 in Compton, California on a small show in which Mysterio Jr. injured his already bad ankles even worse by doing a dive out of the ring into a Frankensteiner onto Psicosis in the floor. It was said that his ankles were hurting so badly he couldn't even drive himself home because the pressure of hitting the gas metal was so painful. I'd be willing to bet he won't miss any bookings, or will he be much less spectacular on those bookings. Mysterio Jr., Halloween, Louisiana. Parka and Damian are booked in Compton on December 29 and Bakersfield, California on December 30 for indie shows. Also at the December 22 Compton, California show, a fan in the balcony threw something big at Psicosis, and Psicosis went up to the balcony and wound up punching the fan out. It was enough of a scene that the police were called and came to arrest Psicosis for battery on the fan, but by this point he had unmasked, and when the police came to the dressing room, they were told he had already left the building. Maybe he should change his name to El Fugitivo. Caught the December 1 Mexico City match with Mysterio Jr. and Thunderbird and Venom vs. Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera and Perro Silva, and it was awesome. During the match, Thunderbird and Venom did simultaneous Sasuke specials, space flying tiger drops, plus Thunderbird did a maneuver where he was in the ring and did a springboard onto the floor with a dropkick onto Psicosis, although it was more like a flying kamikaze hip attack than a dropkick. Both Venom and Psicosis did moonsaults from the top rope to the floor, and Mysterio Jr. did a Liger flip dive. Told their match on December 15 in the same building, which will probably air on television in 2 weeks, was significantly better. Japan. When Koji Kiao was in the United States for UFC last week, after Denver he went to Los Angeles to negotiate with Royce Gracie. Gracie was very eager for a match in Japan against Kiao, who was a grand champion in sumo before becoming a very poor pro wrestler and is 6'6" and probably close to 400 pounds, and they are seriously talking about a date in September. When he arrived in Japan, he announced that he would be in the May 16th UFC show and had to get a win on that show, and then if he did, Gracie would agree to face him in September in Japan at either Budokan Hall or the Tokyo Dome. Basically a slow week, with the biggest show being the semi-finals of the Rings Battle Dimension tournament on December 19 in Osaka. It came down to Akira Maeda beating Hans Niemann in 3:48 and Yoshihisa Yamamoto beating last year's champion, Volk Han, in what would be classified as an upset but really quite predictable since this year was designed to get Yamamoto over. The finals are January 24th at Budokan Hall, and since it's Maeda's 37th birthday, he's almost certain to win. For Yamamoto, just beating Han and getting to the finals and coming close is enough of a victory, since the style for younger wrestlers is to take steps slowly, and the win over Han was such a step. Han vs. Niemann for third place will be the semi. The other big show was an FMW card on December 21 at Yokohama Bunka Gym, which drew a sellout announced at 5,500. I don't believe that many can legitimately be put in that building, which saw Michinoku wrestlers Great Sasuke, Taka Michinoku and Super Delphin work the main event, where Koji Nakagawa and Sasuke and Hayabusa beat Delphin and Michinoku and Riki Fuji. Hayabusa and Sasuke working as a team was probably the main draw. They also had a barbed wire match with broken glass around the ring, with Hideki Hasaka and Jason the Terrible and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga beating Haido and Wing Kanimura and Super Leather, while All Japan Women sent Asia Kong and Bison Kimura as Kong, and FMW Woman star Megumi Kudo beat Kimura and FMW's Combat Toyota. This match set up a Kong vs. Combat match on January 10th in Chiba on a card which also includes Kudo vs. Chigusa Nagio and a 6-man barbed wire match on top. Horace Boulder and Hisakatsu Oya also captured the World Brass Knucks tag titles, beating Yoshiaki Fujiwara, New Japan Indy and Daisuke Ikeda, Battlelords, on the show, and make their first title defense on January 5th at Korakuen Hall against Jason the Terrible and Super Leather. FMW ran an all-women's show on December 22 at Korakuen Hall with Kudo over Shark Tsuchiya in a barbed wire match, so the deal with Tsuchiya leaving was just an angle to build to this match, which drew a sellout of 2,150. Chigusa Nagio worked the undercard, beating Bad Nurse Nakamura in 52. In return, Combat Toyota, Yukari Ishikura, Kaori Nakayama and Kudo from FMW worked Nagayo's show December 23 at Korakuen Hall, which also drew a sellout. The biggest news stemming from that card is it was the first card Atsushi Onita has attended since his retirement. Mr. Pogo was also at the card and issued a challenge to Onita. Most of the newspapers are already reporting this as the beginning of the angle to bring Onita back to wrestling. Weekly Pro Wrestling, which traditionally puts out a calendar at this point usually with all the young upcoming stars from all the different companies, this year instead did a calendar where every photo was Manami Toyota. The December 25 All Japan Women's Korakuen show was that Manami Toyota wrestled 31-minute periods against revolving women. It was less than 30 different opponents, maybe 15 opponents all working 2 different 1-minute periods. Toyota pinned most of the young girls, went the full minute without a fall against most of the veterans, but did get pinned by Kaoru Ito, Mima Shimoda, which got a huge pop, and by Kyoko Inoue, who will be her next major world title challenger probably on March 31st. Toyota later pinned Inoue as well, so they split falls. Toyota ended up with 9 wins, 3 losses and 18 draws. Told Toyota never stopped moving and flying the entire period. The new women's group called Yoshimoto Pro Wrestling, run by the leading comedy bookers in Japan, opened up in an Osaka disco before 250 fans on both December 24 and December 25. The money apparently is made because TV Asahi, one of the networks, will give the group a 90-minute television special on January 6 with the top matches from the first 2 shows. The next show will be March 9 in Osaka and the FMW women will appear, and they've got a Tokyo nightclub show set for April and plan to run monthly after that point. Bull Nakano had her first match back since blowing out her knee 4 weeks earlier on December 24 teaming with Kuga the Bloody Phoenix. All I know is she's a former All Japan Women's star under a hood, beating Bison Kimura and Chikako Shiratori. Jaguar Yokota appeared in the opener on the show under her real name, Toshimi Yokota, with the storyline being that she's going back to her birth as a wrestler for the birth of the new group. She worked as Jaguar later in the show and again the next night. On the first night, Kuga upset Bison, which set up a singles match on December 25 which Bison won. Tokyo Pro Wrestling ran Korakuen Hall on December 23, and this was after the FMW all-women's show. Mr. Pogo worked the show beating Kishin Kawabata, and after the main event, group leader Takashi Ishikawa talked about having an Onita vs. Pogo match on its show in the future. New Japan ran Korakuen Hall on December 24 drawing 1,740 with the main item heating up the Kunyaki Kobayashi vs. Akira Nagami feud, which is leading to a hair match. JWP and LLPW each concluded their own tag team tournaments this past week. LLPW was doing a tourney for an entire tour with Rumi Kazama and Karula, Harley Saito wearing a chicken mask, beating Yasha Kurenai and Carol Midori in the finals on December 22 in Chiba. JWP on December 21 in Beppu had a one-night tourney with Akari Fukuoka and Cutie Suzuki beating Devil Masami and Commando Borishoy on top. JWP sold out Korakuen Hall with 2,000 on December 24 for the 10-year anniversary of the debuts of Mayumi Ozaki, Cutie Suzuki, and Dynamite Kansai. In the main event, the trio beat Masami and Fukuoka and Hiromi Yagi. On January 11 in Kagoshima, Kansai defends the JWP belt against Fukuoka, while on January 31 in Osaka, Kaoru and Fukuoka defend the tag belts against Ozaki and Suzuki. Al Snow worked the December 13 Fujinami show on the undercard doing a job for Black Cat and is going back in January. From the magazine photos of the J-Cup, it appeared to be incredible. The Mysterio Jr. Psychosis highlight looked to be a plancha over the post into a Frankensteiner on the floor. The hot move of the show was the Frankensteiner off the top rope, as it was done 8 times, twice by Grand Naniwa, Ultimo Dragon, and once by Shinjiro Otani, Mysterio Jr., El Samurai, and Wild Pegasus. Michinoku Pro has a show on January 10 at the Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center headlined by Great Sasuke and Giant Zebra, Kenji Takano vs. Mr. Pogo and Grand Naniwa. Battler's Yuki Ishikawa, who mainly does shoot style, works under a hood as the Kamikaze teaming with Tiger Mask against Shoichi Funaki and Taka Michinoku. Battler's debuts on January 13 at Korakuen Hall using Sasuke and some Michinoku guys as the main draw. Ryuma Go has January 16 booked for Korakuen Hall for his 25th anniversary of his pro debut, and he'll team with Kiao in a tag match. New Japan isn't promoting another build as UWF I card until March 1 at Budokan Hall. The former UWF wrestlers will do a tour of Israel, where the UWF, a television show, is very popular, in February. All Japan drew a 2.2 rating on December 17, while New Japan did a 3.0 on December 6. USWA The plan right now is to move the weekly Memphis shows to Wednesdays starting this coming week. There will be a few weeks because of a minor league ice hockey team that plays in the Mid-South Coliseum that they may still have to run occasional Mondays, but the decision was made as a general rule. The situation with the USWA title is kind of strange. Tex Slazenger is still the champion, and the title change we reported to Brian Christopher on television on December 16 didn't happen. Christopher wrestled Slazenger on that television show with the winner to get a shot at Jeff Jarrett on December 27, which Christopher won. It was never said that the USWA title was at stake. However, later in the show, Christopher came out wearing the USWA title belt, so the assumption was that it was a title match and title change, although it was never actually said so. I don't know if the situation with Christopher wearing the belt was explained on television this past week, but Tex is still the champ. Jimmy Valiant and Super Mario canceled this week's Memphis booking. The match with Valiant representing Randy Hale's hair, going against Smoky Mountain Massacre's hair, has been changed to Massacre vs. Moondog Cujo in a battle of heels in a hair versus hair. Coco were returned as a heel, saying that he used to be in the WWF and beat everyone in the WWF and can beat everyone in the USWA as well. Nothing like selective memory. Two job guys, Tony Williams and Yellow Jacket, then did a singles match after Williams won, where ran in and gave both a brainbuster. Scott Bowden did a hilarious interview talking about PG-13, saying that they are so small they should only be wrestling little wrestlers like Little Beaver, Little Tokyo, and Bill Dundee. They were acting on TV like Bowden would be managing the Rock and Roll Express this week. Slazenger defended the title on television against Doug Gilbert. When Bowden interfered, Gilbert chased him around the ring and was attacked by Tracy Smothers, who hit him with the flagpole for the DQ. Downtown Bruno will be having another match with a local DJ this week in Verona, Mississippi. Jeff Jarrett was on television wearing his complete WWF ring outfit so that may signal a heel turn in the match with Christopher on December 27. The television show ended with Lawler in the studio audience leading a rendition of Jingle Bells. ECW. A correction from a couple of weeks back. Tickets for the ECW arena we had reported as being raised from $15.25 to $18.30 when in fact they were $12.25, and the $12 seats are being raised to $15. The Queen shows, which are scheduled to be monthly with a second date on February 3, will have a $35 top ticket price. Steve Austin and Tom Pritchard will finish with ECW this week, so neither will be on the January 5 ECW Arena show. That ECW Arena show will be the final appearance of Public Enemy and Conan, with the show basically built around P's last match. Gina Moore, who is one of Dennis Coralluzzo's friends and compatriots, was on a small wrestling radio show hosted by Eric Sims, who has done martial arts seminars with Dan Severn, in New Jersey, issuing a ridiculous challenge saying that he wanted the NWA champion, Severn, against the ECW champion in a cage match to the finish with guards around the ring to prevent interference and for each company to put up $250,000 in the losing promotion could no longer promote wrestling. Coralluzzo himself was even embarrassed, calling it an act of random stupidity. Only matches known at press time for the January 5 ECW Arena show are Sandman vs. Conan and Rey Mysterio Jr. and 911 vs. Eliminators. There is a great danger in exposing Mysterio because in with guys the size of Eliminators, and 911, he'll look like a small child. A generation ago when Tiger Mask worked in New Japan and was super over, New Japan put him in a main event with Inoki and Fujinami where his opponents were Steve Wright and Don Morocco and Masked Superstar, the latter two of whom were two of the larger and most powerful looking guys in the business at the time, and seeing Tiger Mask fighting them just exposed Tiger Mask's lack of size, and New Japan never did anything like that again. The situation with the Bruise Brothers is that Paul Heyman has talked with them about coming in for a short-term deal. Ron Harris is looking at going into police work full-time because he's got a family and police work has a better benefits package than pro wrestling, and is taking his exam at the end of January. Headhunters are starting on the late January ECW Arena show, and Shane Douglas is virtually a lock to be returning, although Heyman may stall it out several months so that he can do enough interviews on television to make fans forget his WWF stint before he actually appears in an important match. Here and there. Latest notes from Puerto Rico. WWC is attempting its biggest show in years on January 6 at Hiram Bithorn Stadium in Bayamon, a 35,000-seat stadium. Since most WWC shows draw in the 500 range and they don't come close to filling small arenas nowadays, nobody can figure out why they've booked such a large stadium. The show features a bout for the held-up Universal title between Carlos Colon and Mabel, plus a heart punch match with Invader No. 1 versus El Bronco Kodiak. Texas Hangman Killer from Japan and Midwest defends the TV title against Pulgarcito, a local wrestler who is awful. Mascarita Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto vs. Jarito Estrada and Partita Morgan. A scaffold match with Hurricane Castillo Jr. vs. Shawn Summers, Ricky Santana vs. Ray Gonzalez in a chain match and more. Invader number 1 Jose Gonzalez is back as booker with Santana as his assistant. Mabel from WWF was in over the weekend, leading Colin in a non-title match on December 22 in Ponce and going to a no contest with the belt held up the next night in Caguas. Duke Dries was also in for the weekend. Castillo and Sweet Brown Sugar, 70s star Skip Young, beat tag champs Rex King and Shawn Summers in a few non-title matches. King is leaving this week for All Japan but will be back in February. Texas Hangman Psycho is working under the name Blackjack Bennett. Greg Valentine is also headed in. Gorgeous George, Rob Kellum, is supposed to be leaving for WCW, while Kenny Kendall is headed in full-time. In what was billed as the final match of his career, Wahoo McDaniel, 57, pinned the Desperado before 450 fans in Clinton, South Carolina on December 16. Ultimate Championship Wrestling on January 13 in Alexandria, Virginia, and the Secret Cove Sports Bar has Iron Sheik, King Kong Bundy, Jimmy Snuka and Brutus Beefcake booked. Independent Championship Wrestling on February 10 in Wallace, North Carolina is headlined by Ricky Morton. Bruno Sammartino's son Denny had a son born this past week named Anthony Bruno. A correction from 2 weeks back. The main event on December 9 in Inkster, Michigan was listed here as Malcolm Monroe and Ron Simmons and Tommy Starr over Outlaws and Tex Monroe, but the Outlaws team actually won this stretcher match. Incredibly Strange Wrestling ran on December 23 in San Francisco, but all the people involved in last month's incident where they went to the middle of an adjacent busy street and a valet relieved herself on the face of a wrestler were fired. The highlight was one of the heels shooting a flamethrower at heckling fans. In Dallas, they are doing a tournament to crown the first CWA champion, which comes down to Chip the Firebreaker, who is expected to win, versus Scott Putski on December 29 in Dallas. Rod Price and John Hawk have returned from Austria, although Hawk did well in his WWF tryout and may not be around long. Greg Valentine was in on December 22 putting over Putski in the semifinals. Valentine comes in frequently because it's a chance on a day off to visit his dad. The other semi was supposed to have Chip beating Mark Valiant, who unmasked himself as he was working as Conan, but due to bad weather, Valiant couldn't make it, so Al Jackson subbed. Guido Falcone is still out of action with a bad knee, on crutches. Pennsylvania Valley Angel has a show on January 6 at the Northern Liberties Rec Center in Philadelphia with Tommy Cairo and Devon Storm among others. The Winnipeg wrestler Joe Ace, who also worked as Joe E. Legend, was a Sweet Daddy Siki trainee in Toronto who worked in FMW as Cowboy Billy Johnson. Alan Berry has a show under the IPW banner on January 23 in Asheville, North Carolina with Brad and Steve Armstrong vs. Gangstas, Tommy Rich vs. Punisher, Terry Gordy vs. KC Thunder, Headbangers and more. UFC. Denver Postscript. Both the Denver Post and Rocky Mountain News had final stories about the UFC on December 20. The News ran an editorial stating that the extent of the brutality seems to have been exaggerated, while not praising the event, and in fact stating that the paper has no quarrel with Mayor Wellington Webb if he considers UFC inappropriate for city facilities. It said that outlawing the event shouldn't be at the top of politicians' priority lists. Columnist Chuck Green, who wrote a few negative articles leading to the event, headlined his column with, "Okay, so I changed my mind." He said that he didn't intend to watch the match, but instead went to the event, had a front row seat, and enjoyed himself, and mentioned that even though there was blood, it was nothing worse than is seen regularly in boxing, and said considering all the media hype, it was a relatively tame show, and claimed the politicians who rallied so hard to ban the event must have been disappointed. Green wrote, "If they expect to use the violence of Saturday night as evidence that ultimate fighting should be banned, they better be prepared to review videotapes of professional hockey, football, boxing and rodeo as well." But he closed with a ridiculous statement that the event will probably gross $75 million and said, like most of pro sports, the real obscenity of ultimate fighting is in the finances, not in the action. WCW. Because of Christmas week, we don't have the weekend ratings. The WCW ratings for the weekend of December 16, besides the Nitro rating listed in last week's issue, saw WCW Saturday Night do a 2.6, its largest in months, although that is tradition when college football ends and the weather gets worse, not to mention the Saturday rating generally being up 0.2 whenever Sunday is preempted. And Pro did a 1.2. The rating served as impetus to get Dusty Rhodes onto the commentary for Starrcade. The event will have taken place before you read this, but my gut feeling going in is that will be the worst announced wrestling pay-per-view of the year with the exception of Collision in Korea. With 7 matches involving Japanese that are nameless and faceless because they've done such an incredibly awful job of getting them, and their moves over, all Heenan and Rhodes will be able to do is tell Japanese jokes, and that'll get old halfway through the first match. Then they'll have nothing left for 6.5 matches. Nitro on December 25, taped December 18 in Augusta, Georgia, saw Lex Luger beat Scotty Riggs, Sting beat Bubba Rogers, Dean Malenko beat Mr. JL in a good short match, and Savage beat Flair via DQ in more than 20 minutes. Craig Pittman asked Jimmy Hart to manage him. Hart asked Pittman to take his shirt off, and then Hart started laughing at him and said for Pittman to come back when he looks as good as Lex Luger. Boy, what kind of a message does that send? Of course, this all ends up with Teddy Long managing Pittman. Eric Bischoff really rubbed in the ratings success, talking about how Nitro proved the critics wrong, and he's got the right to gloat about that, and said how top stars of the WWF are leaving in droves for WCW. Steve McMichael called the WWF the lesser league, and when the subject of what Medusa did came up, McMichael said that she shouldn't have thrown the belt in the garbage can because the belt is more fitting for being thrown in the kitty litter. McMichael's announcing isn't even up to the level of what goes in the kitty litter. WCW has expressed interest in the Rock and Roll Express. An official from K1 was at the UFC show with Sonny Ono and K1, and WCW will apparently do a live pay-per-view show from Japan in 1996. There's no way that can financially make out, but I guess K1 is willing to foot the bill and take the loss because of the belief it gives the organization prestige to be on American pay-per-view. Nitro scheduled for January 1st is Flair vs. Hogan, Arnold Anderson vs. Savage, and Harlem Heat defending the tag titles against Nasty Boys. It boggles the mind to think that they've got Flair vs. Hogan booked and never mentioned it on December 25 when they had a free night with no competition to hype the next week, when WWF has done such a good job of Raw Bowl hype going head up with them. WCW didn't even hype or mention one match on the January 1st show. January 8th Nitro in Charleston is scheduled for Flair vs. Sting, Savage vs. Luger, and VK Wall Street vs. Joey Maggs. January 15th Nitro in Miami is scheduled for Flair vs. Sting, Savage vs. Luger, Johnny B. Bad vs. Giant, and Kevin Sullivan and Hugh Morris vs. Anderson and Brian Pillman. For the weekend ending December 10, WCW barely nipped WWF in overall viewership with a 6.2 aggregate rating to a 6.0. Upcoming center stage dates are January 10th, January 17th, January 18th, and February 28. They have house shows set for February 17 at the Norfolk Scope, for those turned away at World War III because they papered the town so much that many people with free tickets were turned away at the door, and February 18 at the Baltimore Arena. They also tape WCW Pro and Worldwide at Disney from February 1 to February 8, with February 5 off for Nitro in Lakeland, Florida. WWF. Highlights of the television taping for Superstars on December 19 in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania before 1,500 fans in a terrible blizzard. John Hawk got a tryout with Uncle Zeb Dutch Mantle as manager and put over Savio Vega. Hawk got good heel heat for a guy who had never appeared on television. The Sons of Samoa, who I believe were Samu and either the guy from Puerto Rico who works as Prince Cuyo or the guy who works as Tahitian Warrior, beat the Arachnoids, Spiders aka Headbangers. The Samoans were managed by Lou Albano. In a WWF tag title match, which aired this past weekend, Smoking Guns beat Rad Radford and Skip. After Radford was pinned, Sonny fired him from the Body Donnas and Skip jumped him as he yelled back as Sonny. Davey Boy Smith beat Marty Jannetty. Ahmed Johnson was scheduled to face Jerry Lawler, but Lawler came out on crutches and Arachnoid 2 replaced him and got squashed. Skip beat Radford in their grudge match when Flip interfered. Radford was a babyface in this match. Mr. Perfect interviewed Razor Ramon and was making fun of the fact Goldust had the hots for him. Goldust gave Ramon a teddy bear as a present and Ramon ripped up the bear. This whole angle is so ironic considering how vehement McMahon was years ago about how all his troubles came from media that was gay bashing. Owen Hart beat Henry Godwin, who slopped Jim Cornette after the match. Ramon had a squash with Jeff Hardy and Ramon lost via cord due to Goldust. Ramon gave Hardy 2 razor's edges after the match. Sid in 1-2-3 Kid beat Aldo Montoya and Avatar in a short squash. One bad match and they've already buried Avatar underground. In a skip and flip squash, Flip was so funny that the jobbers couldn't keep from breaking up. Diesel beat Isaac Yankem. The final dark match saw Bret Hart and Undertaker and Ramon beat Yokozuna and Owen and Sid in less than 1 minute. TV ratings for the weekend of December 16 saw Action Zone Duel 1.5 and Mania 1.3. At the In Your House, if you watch closely on replay, it definitely looks like a classic blade job that Bret Hart did. As you can see him clasping something between the thumb and forefinger, go to the forehead, etc. Hart needed stitches legit, so it definitely wasn't a blood capsule. Hunter Hearst Helmsley also needed stitches in his back, and Davey Boy Smith injured his knee on the show. Although all worked TV, Smith missed Raw work the next day. A correction on the Raw Bowl from last week. It's actually a 4-team match and not an 8-man tag, with the Guns as the survivors over the teams of Owen and Yokozuna, Ramon and Vega, and Kid and Sid. Buddy Landel apparently messed up his ankle after the tapings in Bethlehem. He slipped on ice going through a revolving door and tore up his ankle and needed surgery and will be out of action for at least 8 weeks. Landel's job for Ahmed Johnson was a last-second deal. Vince McMahon and Jim Ross were apparently trying to convince Dean Douglas to work the match, and Douglas wouldn't because of his back injury. There was no contingency plan, and Landel basically was asked to help them out of a jam and did the squash job in the manner they requested because Johnson is getting the mega push. Apparently he was going to be rewarded for being a team player by getting a spot on the roster, but wound up injured almost immediately. There has been talk of Sunny doing an angle where her 91-year-old husband passes away and leaves her with a lot of money and she buys a major heel. On the In Your House pregame show, they had Jim Ross in overalls in the hog pen. They also called one of the pigs Terry, as in Hulk Hogan's first name. The hearing for Douglas Griffith on the assault charges in the Shawn Michaels incident was postponed this past week. No word on rescheduling. They did confiscate some signs at the pay-per-view, but only those that were negative to the WWF babyfaces, although they obviously didn't get all of them either. According to one wrestler who has taken the Tiger Driver or Pearl River Plunge a few times on television from Ahmed Johnson, the move is a piece of cake and the bump is totally up to the individual taking the bump. The move that's the problem is the spinebuster he uses to set it up. Among the highlights of Vince McMahon online on December 18 regarding UFC, it is a completely different form of entertainment than the WWF. However, if the fans want to see a very violent style of wrestling, they know where to get it. ECW. McMahon later said ECW wasn't his cup of tea, thinking it to be too violent, and claimed not to have spoken to Paul E. dangerously in years to his knowledge. Heyman does all his WWF dealings through Bruce Pritchard, so that is probably the case. Regarding Public Enemy, McMahon said that Ted Turner is a billionaire offering large sums of money to wrestlers just so they won't go to WWF. In reality, the huge sums of money Ted was throwing at Public Enemy was $85,000 per year. McMahon said WCW won't have a clue how to market them since they never went to the WWF, so therefore WCW won't be able to steal how the WWF got them over. He also complained that WCW chose to put a wrestling show on Monday nights, claiming they showed no regard for the wrestling fans of America, and said Eric Bischoff is carrying out the greedy, selfish vitriol of billionaire Ted. He also knocked Hulk Hogan, saying he was a selfish and shallow human being who believes he can con wrestling fans into thinking he's as great as he was years ago, and knocked WCW for portraying the Giant as Andre's son, saying it appears WCW's view is that there is a sucker born every minute, and said WCW treats its fans as if they are morons. He also asked when the last legitimate steroid test was given to anyone at WCW. While there is validity to some of what McMahon said, in many cases, such as treatment of fans, let's face it, how much regard for the wrestling fans of America did McMahon show when he was putting everyone out of business, and when he was making up his own storylines and trying to push his own washed-up or untalented headliners because their name could still draw money? The readers' pages. Oh my God. I gave the Ultimate a big thumbs up. I'm a huge mark for their shows, but their play-by-play guy isn't loud enough for my taste. I give In Your House the middle finger. How dare they refer to ECW as barbaric only to emulate us when their buy rates slide. Joey Styles. Stamford, Connecticut. UFC. I gave the Ultimate a big thumbs down. Best match was Severn vs. Toktarov and worst was Ruiz vs. Toktarov, although all the matches except the final match were bad. Actually, I haven't participated in thumbs up/thumbs down on UFC because as a legitimate sporting contest, I don't feel a poll such as this applies with everyone trying their best to win rather than entertain. It's not a work and shouldn't be judged on entertainment value. Having said that, I don't think I'm going to buy another pay-per-view. The defensive skills among the elite are sufficient now to ensure that most marquee matches will go to the time limit, and the judges' views, heavily tilted toward aggressiveness, may not be a fair way of determining winners once the fighters learn to adjust to what the judges want to see. Would it hurt for them to tape the shows ahead of time and air the highlights on pay-per-view, and then eliminate the time limits? What street fight has time limits? Of course, the direction UFC is headed is for sufficiently skilled fighters continually having relatively boring time limit matches in all the main events. With the exception of Severn vs. Shamrock, every main event, and the Ultimate's top 3 matches all went the time limit. With time limits, defense is easy. I found in every match of the last 3, I lost interest and my mind wandered, although less in the championship match. Also, the ultimate winner is someone who lost to both Gracie and Shamrock. Without those two in the tournament, it didn't seem ultimate. It more reaffirmed that the real ultimate is a Shamrock-Gracie singles match with no time limit. How about having them fight using just a mat, no cage, and the edge of the mat would force a restart? Why did John McCarthy call Tokharov's match on Blood against Severn in UFC V, but not this time? Steve Dr. Lucha Sims. Santa Monica, California. DM, having the match fought with mats and breaking once you reach the edge of the mat would make winning even harder, because it would allow breaks of submission holds by reaching the edge, and it's hard enough to get finishing maneuvers on guys of this caliber as it is. While street fights don't have time limits, the whole street fight analogy is flawed because street fights are broken up very quickly in most cases. Street fights don't have restarts if there is no action. Going to the ground in a street fight is a lot harder for the guy on the bottom because they don't have a nice smooth mat to lay back on and wait for an opening, and the guy on top can do damage by slamming the guy on bottom's head against a floor or pavement. Most importantly, street fights don't have time limits, but no street fight will ever go more than a few minutes before it's either broken up, or the cops come. If Gracie and Shamrock were in a street fight, it would be broken up well before either man got a submission lock on the other, so there would still be no winner. I gave the ultimate a big thumbs up. I was shocked at how fast the first round went and the way Dan Severn beat Paul Verlins without throwing a punch, and then the way he slapped Tank Abbott around for 18 minutes and Abbott hopped the fence and ran away, almost typical of a bully who finally got his ass kicked. I hope Abbott will be in the next one and come in with a more pissed off mood. Why does Chemo get a super fight? Yeah, he hung in there with Royce Gracie, but that's all he did. A super fight between Chemo and Abbott would be better. Ken Shamrock should cut through Chemo and Tank on the same night, since both are more or less just home run throwers. I'd like to see badass kickboxers like Rick the Jet Rufus or Bad Brad Heflon enter. Why do sports radio hosts, both locally and nationally, laugh at people who call up about UFC? Some even say it's fake and none of them want to talk about it. It's just like the senators. They haven't seen it and go around making jerk-off statements. From now on, I'm only going to buy UFC since it's sports-like and the competitors are really world-class. These rip-off organizations are going to hurt the UFC by giving the whole thing a really bad name, and they'll all be lumped together. It was really low for Medusa to trash the WWF belt on Nitro. Vince gave her his trust and gave her the title, and she or anyone else doing something like that are slime. It's worse than a boxer doing it. Riddick Bowe did it, but he earned the belt. You think Bischoff is really going to remember her after that night? She's going to be like everyone else WCW brings in. No push. Bischoff must have had a wet dream while this was going on, but it came off poorly with her stammering and throwing the belt in the can twice, once before her little speech and then again after. Rob Bartlett was a better buffoon than Steve McMichael, but Vince was smart enough to dump his ass. Eric is clueless. Chuck Richmond. Cincinnati, Ohio. Michaels. The Shawn Michaels angle totally threw me. It was the best executed angle I've ever seen in terms of realism, but at the same time I'm disgusted by it. Either way, I think it will set a standard for future angles of this sort and start a trend of more of these kinds of angles in US wrestling. Mark Warzaha. Detroit, Michigan. If that was a fake fainting spell, then everyone acted it out perfectly. I thought it was real. Thumbs down if it was fake, because of calling for $1.49 a minute to find out about a fake injury. Rick Davis. Bay City, Michigan. DM, the way everyone reacted was exactly how nobody would have reacted if it was real. A fan wouldn't have known, but any wrestler should have spotted it right away, even though I know some who bought it. The referee wouldn't have kicked his leg, he'd have bent over and whispered in his ear, asking him if he was okay. His opponent would have gotten back in the ring close to him to ask if he was okay and tried to work the crowd to stall for him to recover, distract the fans from what was going on if it wasn't part of the script. They wouldn't have devoted more than 45 seconds to the post-match without diverting attention elsewhere, going backstage or something. They never would have aired the planted fan close-ups nearly in tears, and they certainly would have never aired a replay. The Raw sham with Shawn Michaels needs to be condemned. How can Vince McMahon be allowed to get away with this even once, especially in the same week when we learn of alleged witness tampering in his trial? I thought the acquittal was too cut and dried and he deserved to do some time. Now it has been demonstrated how brazen and callous McMahon acts. Double jeopard aside, the world of pro wrestling can ill afford to have McMahon free to play his sick games. Far too many wrestlers have already paid dearly through steroid-related diseases and crippling disabilities. Edie Bailey. Aberdeen, Maryland. The situation with Shawn Michaels is excellent. It is everyone talking. So what if they are playing off his injury to elicit sympathy? Just consider how much money everyone made off O.J. Simpson. That was much more disgusting, so doing the angle is clearly justified. Plus, nobody died. The follow-up at least put heat on Owen Hart. It's a good choice because he has the ability to carry his end against anyone. The need to put more heat on the heels. Undertaker needs to turn. Dean Douglas was a failure because he should have stayed the franchise. The WWF shouldn't let WCW get Public Enemy. They could bring back the Heavenly Bodies and tear the building down. I'm glad you and everyone else is seeing that unless Eddie Guerrero is working with somebody talented, he isn't so good. Like I said before. Chuck Mullen. Munhall, Pennsylvania. SMW. I'm saddened that SMW has folded. In the course of 4 years, Jim Cornette led what was at one time the hottest promotion in the country through a series of ups and downs. He always made more of what he had to work with than probably anyone else would have been able to. I had the privilege of working with Cornette during what I feel was SMW's strongest period and feel a few observations are in order. Cornette took a band of castaways and produced a show that people disgusted by the Jim Herd regime of WCW could be excited by. SMW was hailed for its sensible booking, coherent storylines, and emphasis of quality performances over sterile big-money production. Cornette knew there was a market niche for plain old-style wrestling and filled it. His sense of humor was indelibly stamped on every show and it made SMW a hot commodity. One actually had to go through trouble to get it through either a tape trade or finding it on some backwoods UHF station, and that made savoring every hour even sweeter. Talent the big companies had little or no interest in were made stars. Did you really think if Cornette hadn't given Chris Condito a forum to display his skills that WWF would have ever given a job to someone his size? The fact SMW was the first small promotion to be recognized on television by both WCW and WWF speaks volumes for the quality of the product. When Cornette offered me a job, I was overwhelmed. I was impressed by the sense of camaraderie among the boys. There was no infighting, backstabbing, or jealousy. My opinion of most pro wrestlers as ignorant carny scumbags was shattered. Everyone seemed to be proud to be part of this renegade promotion that broke all the rules of what the corporate types thought pro wrestling should be. After the infamous Wise, Virginia incident, the very people who had previously hailed Cornette as the savior of wrestling began to vilify him as public asshole number one. Cornette's personal disagreements with his employees and certain bedroom journalists began to overshadow his work. People who couldn't write, interviewing people who couldn't talk for people who couldn't read began to bait him in print so they might get 5 seconds of fame by being cursed out by him. I don't blame him for having no patience with incompetent never-has-beens. He juggled overseeing every aspect of a full-time wrestling company with a WWF schedule without playing the corporate game of letting shit run downhill. Toward the end, budget limitations combined with something sorely lacking in this business, a sense of loyalty to the guys who stuck with him through the lean times, apparently caused Cornette to keep recycling the same talent. The resulting decline in interest led to SMW's ultimate demise. If there is any justice in wrestling, and that's a big if, Cornette will be given a creative position with a company that could provide the financial backing to put his booking genius to good use. Daryl Van Horn. Columbia, South Carolina. Some thoughts about Jim Cornette and SMW. I got a call from Buddy Landell the Monday after the shutdown. Landell knows how much I love old-style wrestling. He knows of my background in country music promotion. He also knows about my business success and financial position, and also my respect for Cornette and his work in keeping his promotion alive. As you might guess, Landell's call had to do with me putting money into SMW to keep it afloat. I told Landell that if Cornette wanted to call me, I'd be willing to discuss it. Let me point out that Cornette doesn't know me. He could have easily assumed, as is often the case in wrestling, that I was a money mark who would hand over a check just for the privilege of being in the wrestling business. The opposite is true. I would have invested in Cornette, but only if operating procedures had been changed and ideas implemented that I believe would have made the business move toward profitability. In fact, Cornette and I would have probably made a great team, each having strengths to complement the other. Let me repeat that Cornette could have and probably did assume that I was a mark Landell had lined up to keep things going a while longer. Cornette didn't call me, instead sending word through Landell that he didn't think the promotion could be turned around, and didn't want to lose anyone else's money. Few people would have acted with that much integrity in that situation. Tom Gentry. Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm writing this in response to the letter written by Jim Cornette that appeared in the November 20 Observer. I've been a fan of Cornette since his days in the Jim Crockett Mid-Atlantic promotion. Though I haven't always agreed with what he said or has done, I have always supported him. It is at this point that I can no longer do that. While I mourn the loss of another wrestling organization, I can't agree that the blame lies with the two most powerful companies in the United States. I find it ironic that he blasted WCW and ECW in his letter but conveniently forgot about the WWF. I haven't agreed with nor liked all the angles in WCW or ECW, but I do enjoy watching both products. The fans of ECW appear to enjoy the violence and the wrestlers that the organization offers them, and that is their prerogative. Some of the violence turns me off, but I accept that as their niche and I respect that. I'm also turned off by Cornette and Paul Heyman's constant bashing of WCW and Eric Bischoff's constant bashing of WWF. Now that Cornette and Heyman no longer get paychecks from Ted Turner, they feel the need to abuse the organizations that gave each their national exposure and a high-paying job. Now Cornette drinks from the fountain of Vince McMahon and you hear nothing bad about that company coming from him. Eric Coville, Murray, Kentucky.